Production support for In Focus is provided by Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for Central and Southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The top priority for the Republican majority in this year's Indiana General Assembly session, right-to-work legislation, has passed, prohibiting unions from requiring employees to pay member dues. Proponents of the measure say states with right-to-work laws attract businesses to the state which would not relocate or expand without the provision in place. Opponents say it weakens unions and allows non-union workers to benefit from services provided by organized labor without paying for them. We'll examine what benefits, if any, the state might reap and when the law may start to affect companies' bottom lines as we put right to work in focus. And thanks for joining us for this edition of In Focus. I'm Stan Jastrzebski. Right to work is now the law of the land in Indiana, but the controversy which surrounded the bill's passage is not over. WTIU's Gretchen Frazee has more.
After several days of walkouts by House Democrats, right-to-work legislation passed both the House and the Senate and was quickly signed into law by Governor Mitch Daniels. Just minutes after it passed, Indiana legislators who voted for the bill said they looked forward to seeing the positive effects it would have on the state.
I think we have a great economic climate that the governor and the legislature has created over the past few years, and I think if they will simply look at Indiana, I think they're going to want to come here, and we're already seeing signs of that.
But even as legislators were voting, union workers filled the State House. Those workers said legislators were making the wrong move and promised to vote them out of office during the next elections.
I don't think the people in Indianapolis realize what the benefits they're cutting to the workers.
As the legislation is implemented, the impact it will have on unions is still in question. Some say the law will pit union and non-union workers against one another. Others are more optimistic. Portage State Senator Karen Talion voted against the legislation, but she says she thinks unions in her district will work through the difficulties.
People there know the value of their unions and that this is going to make them probably stick together a lot stronger than they did before.
Indiana business leaders are hoping the promised positive effect on the state's economy will soon be felt. They say companies should be more willing to move their operations to Indiana now that the legislation has passed. Unions have until March 14th to negotiate new contracts with their employers. After that, they cannot include wording in their contracts that would require employees to pay union dues.
And we're joined in studio tonight by afl-cio President Nancy Guyot, Indiana Manufacturers Association Representative Ed Roberts, and Tim Slaper of the Indiana Business Research Center. Thanks to all of you for being here. Nancy, I'd like to start with you. I'd like to start by talking about a lawsuit which was filed this week alleging that right to work is unconstitutional, both perhaps federally and of the state constitution. Let me ask you, this is already the law in 22 other states. Is there any reason to think it'll be declared unconstitutional in Indiana?
Well, obviously, not every state statute has identical language or identical provisions, and this law is different from those of other states that have enacted it, and the challenges are based on the specific law that was passed rather than the concept that was passed.
Ed, my next question will be to you, but I want to go first to a piece of sound from a gentleman you heard from in our opening package, Carlin Yoder, a state senator from Middlebury, who helped to shepherd the law through the state Senate.
He was a Senate sponsor.
Let's see that video real quick.
We've heard over and over again from site selectors that anywhere from 25 to 50% of businesses looking to locate in states immediately write off Indiana and other non-right-to-work states.
Now, Ed, you represent businesses. Can you give me any specifics on which companies he's referring to?
No. Yes, the governor named one company. We now know since the passage of another company, Caterpillar, that's going to come to Muncie. But these site selectors have contracts with their clients. The site selectors tell us about 30% of the folks won't consider a state which isn't right to work. That includes Indiana. You're crossed off the list immediately. The problem is every one of those site selection consulting contracts has a confidentiality clause in it. so that you're not allowed to speak to people about who they didn't favor. They don't want a bad PR situation. They don't make people angry in another state. But the site selectors, the people who do the looking for them, who we've known for decades, have continued to tell us, in my experience for 35 years, that there's a cadre of people out there who will only consider a right-to-work state, and they didn't consider you, and now they will.
There would seem to be two parts to that. One, if you say that there's this 30% number, then you've got to give a number of examples to say, here's where the 30% is, here's who they are. So you have to give people who do and don't accept right to work. And then on the other side of that, don't you have to look past the time when they site select, and couldn't you go back if you are trying to get a right to work statute passed in your state and say, look, here are these companies that went elsewhere, and you are then pushed forward in giving your rationale for getting this passed. Neither of those things has happened.
Yes, they have happened. The President Pro Tem of the Senate has mentioned a company in Noble County that was going to go to Alabama and is now not going to. They're going to stay because they were going to go to a right-to-work state, and we've passed right-to-work. They've also mentioned a Michigan company. They haven't named it. They have said it has a female CEO who ignored Indiana and are halfway through their search and have now come back to us and said, whoops, we'd like to reopen with you. Our Indiana Economic Development Commission gave them a bid in 24 hours. We do know that Caterpillar closing that plant in Canada is going to put that plant at a subsidiary location, one of their subsidiaries, in Muncie. That's a big deal. So in 21 or 2 days, we're told, in fact, the governor told us, there's a dozen people they never had a shot at that they're talking to. Now, none of that's been finalized. The bill is, the law is in effect, but the effect of on contracts isn't even in effect until the 14th of March. So we're kind of in an interim period here, but the response is remarkable.
Tim, let me ask you, there was a Ball State University study that came out that said that right to work might work better in states where the economic conditions are not quite as favorable as they are in Indiana, and said right to work may have a diminished effect on Indiana because, as the governor has said in a number of past State of the State addresses, look, we're doing better than most of our neighbors. Do you believe that's a fair claim? Do the numbers bear that out to you as an economic analyst?
Well, I've read the study, and I would tend to agree with Hicks, the Ball State study, that it would have an incremental effect in Indiana because the governor, the state legislature has gone about trying to build the better sandbox, and this last effort is probably just to build the best sandbox. So any sort of additional enhancements or inducements because of right to work is probably going to have a slightly smaller effect in other locations than other states.
Nancy, let me come back to you. We mentioned that we have until March 14th before this takes full effect, and so unions, we know in some places, have already begun thinking about trying to renegotiate their contracts. And I was thinking about, couldn't a union try to renegotiate, for instance, a long contract, say 10 years, 15 years, to have themselves a decade or a decade and a half to be grandfathered into the old law? Is that something that's being considered at all?
Well, I can't say what each individual union is considering. Certainly it's theoretically possible to negotiate a lengthy contract like that. Doing so probably includes, though, the risk of much lower wage increments than you would normally have in a contract that's negotiated on a 2 or 3 or 4 year basis. And so it would essentially already establish the wage losses we anticipate seeing with right to work.
What are you anticipating, and how do you have the basis to say, look, we think that right to work is going to lower wages? Because that, of course, that's been one of the afl-cio's big claims, is this is going to hurt union wage scales. What is your rationale for saying that?
Actually, our claim is that it's going to hurt everyone's wages, not just those of union members. And the basis for that is that the best research available shows that even when you control for cost of living factors, for the rate of unionization, for the age of the state's workers, et cetera, that right to work lowers wages as much as $1,500 a year.
Ed, let me come back to you. I've heard the governor say, you know, look at the state's job creation efforts, look at how well the state has done compared to Michigan, compared to Kentucky, compared to Illinois, and that has been borne out in a number of different ways. If that's the goal, Why right to work now? Would it be better, based on what you heard Tim say and what you heard Mike Hicks, the economist from Ball State, say in his study, would it be better to wait until the state really needs sort of that prod towards the economic development that the proponents of the law say the state's going to get?
No. If we win 2/3 of the competitions for new locations or expansions that we're engaged in now, and that's 2/3 of 70%, that's 46% of the opportunities that we win. If we win 2/3 of 100, that's 66%. That's 20% opportunities. We have 275,000 people in this state who are unemployed. For some of them, there's no tomorrow without growth. The author of the bill said there are two valid reasons to pass this bill. One is to get a chance to compete for all those jobs. Of itself, that is reason enough to pass it. And individual liberty of itself is reason enough to pass it. This does both.
Let me ask.
May I chime in there?
Absolutely.
The study that we did, which was not a funded study, I was surprised in the last economic expansion we were shedding manufacturing jobs. So there's not, it sounded like you were saying, yeah, well, we really don't need it now, maybe we'll need it later. We needed it back when we were shedding manufacturing jobs, even as we were experiencing modest economic growth in Indiana. Like how much more now when we are in the economic doldrums?
So let me expound on that. Do I hear you to say that you believe this is going to have the job creation effects that Ed and the other proponents of the law say it's going to have? I
might ratchet it back a bit, but I would say it's going to have a positive effect, because not only are you bringing in those companies, those activities because of right to work, you'll have all the supply chain and knock-on effects as well that are going to result from importing those jobs. What we called in my study parachute jobs.
Let me ask you, Indiana's condition is different, for instance, economically than, say, Illinois or Michigan or California or someplace like that. Is this a hypothetical that works no matter where you need to create jobs, or does it work past a certain point? Either you're doing too well or you're not doing well enough? Do you believe that right to work can create jobs no matter what your economic status is?
I think you have to remember who we're competing with. And I'm not sure I like the idea that we're competing with other U.S. states. I feel much better about competing with other, China or Taiwan or Thailand. But when one considers that this increasingly global environment of high competition and trying to make that marginal decision on, do we locate a job here, or do we locate it in Mexico, or do we locate it in China? That's one additional element that pushes the scales in the balance of Indiana, I'd say yeah, absolutely.
You can see now on your screen a map of states that have right-to-work laws or are considering right-to-work laws, and indeed those that have no right-to-work laws as well. There are 23 states now with Indiana that have right-to-work legislation. Nancy, let me ask you the response from the union. Is there still going to be representation available in union shops to people who decide not to pay the dues even as right-to-work goes forward?
Yeah, that's required by federal law.
So if those people are not getting the same, they're getting the same treatment, but some are paying dues, some aren't. I'd like to have you listen to a cut from some union workers who we talked to at the State House and get your reaction to what they had to say. Can we play that real quick, please?
Well, it doesn't just affect me, it affects all these people here that are raising families. Each of us here has kids and wives, and we make a great living in our union. We work hard for our union, and we pay our taxes, and we vote.
As you can see, it's not going to end here. They just keep coming. I just don't understand why there ain't a whole lot more people here. I don't understand why the Republicans are doing this to us.
When you have a split group of people in there, it causes chaos. It causes people to have a bad opinion of the person that they're working next to, who's not paying the union dues, but they're still getting represented.
let me ask you about a couple of things in that cut. First of all, the woman at the end who says, I'm working next to someone who isn't in the union while I'm paying the dues. Is there any reason to think that the chaos that she is describing will happen? Because if you and I are working side by side, is there any reason that I would necessarily know that I'm not paying the dues and you are, or vice versa, and that would cause some sort of schism?
Yeah, I mean, union finances, the books are open to members to examine, so members certainly could become aware of who's paying and who's not paying if they choose to do that. And, you know, I liken it to, you know, the family reunion when there's one brother who will never pick up the tab for dinner. There's going to be some friction sooner or later with that brother, and that's what she's trying to refer to.
The other gentleman in the middle you saw who said, he said, I don't understand why there aren't more people here. And clearly there are many, many thousands of people who are union affiliated in the state of Indiana, some of whom got down to the State House both last year and this year as part of protests. But he seemed to be saying, I'm not sure why this isn't a bigger deal. Does he have a point? Is it something that there are some union members who they're not all that concerned about it?
Yeah, I don't think that's right. You know, we had last year, the count was about 75,000 people come to the State House. People have to take days off work. They have to arrange for transportation. That's not possible in all workplaces. It's not possible in all families for folks to give up days of pay, et cetera. And also there were activities going on in local districts that we asked people to be at. The day I think that you all talked to that gentleman, in addition to those factors, the state police stopped more than half of our people from coming into the State House. So I think he was unaware of his brothers and sisters standing around outside.
Ed, we talked earlier about the sheer number of jobs that might be created, and I got to thinking also about the types of jobs that might be created and the people who might be hired. Is it possible that there could be shops who lose out on a chance now to gain some of the more experienced, longer tenured workers who might be considering relocating to Indiana for some other reason, say from Illinois or some other neighboring non-right-to-work state, where you might lose out on seniority and on the skill built over 25 or 30 years working in a similar position because these people don't want to come to right-to-work states?
Markets drive employment opportunities. They drive migration of people to locations where there are good jobs that they're qualified for. That should be the driving force here. People are going to pay what they have to pay to get qualified people. Let me just make this one short point. This is the #1 manufacturing state in the country in terms of the percentage of jobs, percentage of wages, percentage of the gross domestic product. There are 3 ways to create wealth: manufacturing, mining, and agriculture. Everybody else comes to where the wealth is created. So there'll be an ancillary effect, but we've still got 275,000 folks unemployed. A bunch of those are very highly skilled, very good people. A number of them have been union members or laid off from union shops. These people didn't get their minds erased when they got laid off. They're highly capable people, and we got to get them to work first.
Tim, let me ask you about the state's manufacturing workforce going forward based on what Ed just said. If the state takes a long time and continues to be a right-to-work state for years going forward, what do you think is going to happen to that claim that the state is the #1 manufacturing state in the country? I mean, obviously, if you look at it, you have nowhere to go but down. What I'm asking, I guess, is what's the likelihood that manufacturing becomes less of a part of the state's economy because there are some people who are turned off by right to work?
Well, I have some mixed sentiments about that. As you say, there's only one place to go when you're #1, and that's down. In terms of maintaining that prominence, I think it would hold true for considerable time forward. That said, and this is why I have mixed feelings about it, is that I really think we need to change the state's economic ecology, if you will, in terms of diversifying into other sectors of the economy we're not necessarily so strong in. And that would provide us arguably higher standards of living, higher per capita personal income, because we're not doing too well in the knowledge-based economy. And in terms of my personal sentiment is getting and keeping those manufacturing jobs, that's stopping the hemorrhaging. But we need to educate our youth and retrain our workforce for the jobs that are going to be there 10, 20 years out. Because otherwise, we're gonna fall into an economic tailspin.
Let me ask you, based on the studies you've read and the studies you've personally done at the IBRC, more success stories from states that have adopted right to work, or more struggles, do you think, in states that have adopted right to work, economically speaking?
Well, I think those that would be looking at Idaho would have said, wow, that's an unqualified success. And that, you know, the states that surrounded Idaho did not enjoy the level of success that Idaho enjoyed in the 90s and through the aughts as well. In terms of Oklahoma, the data I've seen on that unfortunately don't go all the way out to the most recent, but they did fairly well as well. There might have been a slight dip at first, but they became right to work just as the economy was starting to gear back up again after the millennial recession. They've done fairly well in that regard as well.
So it sounds like you're saying you have to be very careful to understand the circumstances that go around a state becoming right to work to fully judge whether it has benefited the state or not.
I would say so, yes.
And if I may stick a nose in here, this has been possible under federal law since 1947. A number of the states, particularly those in the Deep South, immediately became right to work states back in that time period. One wonders how valid might be a comparison of what was the nature of their economy before 1947 in the ramp up out of World War II and including World War II versus the time period after. That data is probably obsolete. Their circumstances are entirely changed today.
Nancy, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, I think that you know, there's the fallacy of the proponent's argument is displayed by the comments we've heard here. We're the #1 manufacturing state, but we're going to get more manufacturing jobs by following policies enacted by states that are already behind us. If you look at the Oklahoma example, they actually lost manufacturing jobs in the 10 years since passage by about 1/3. So it hasn't borne out the promises that were made to Oklahomans about the manufacturing jobs that would supposedly rush in. In fact, it's failed in that regard entirely.
Obviously, one of the factors in this is you can't write a contract which requires people going forward to pay union dues. But I wonder, do you think that there could be shops within the state who could say, you should come to us because we are a strong union shop. We can't require our workers to pay these dues, but nonetheless, we have a workforce who are skilled, who are happy with what they're doing, and who choose to pay these dues because this shop has strong union representation. Do you think it'll allow independent single shops here and there to set themselves apart within the marketplace and allow those places to be able to thrive, perhaps?
I don't think right to work changes that. I think there are companies that market themselves that way all the time. You know, there certainly is a work quality and pay differential that comes with having a good, strong union representation and a good, strong union business partnership. And we certainly see that when those employers are hiring, the lines, you know, for folks to apply go down the street and around the corner and then some. The fact of the matter is that people self-select these workplaces because of the representation that occurs in those places. That said, there's always going to be a segment of the population that seeks to get all the benefit of something without any of the responsibility. A gallon of gasoline is worth the same whether you pay for it or not. And most folks would go get a free gallon of gas if the local gas station was offering it. That's the sort of dilemma that can be created in a right-to-work situation.
Let me go back to what we saw the gentleman say about people not necessarily being there. He said, I don't understand why there aren't more people here. I wonder if you think that extends to lawmakers, particularly Democratic lawmakers, who staged a 5-week walkout last year, in part because they opposed right to work, but also in part because they opposed education legislation. They were only gone for a few days this session and came back knowing that they didn't have anywhere near the numbers to make this bill go anywhere but through. Do you think that Democratic lawmakers found during this session that this was something that wasn't worth pushing against?
No, I don't think that at all. I think that you know, they all voted no, to my recollection. I think they spoke very strongly against this policy, and I think that their delays, their caucusing, was intended to delay and allow time for the public to understand it. That unfortunately came to an end a little sooner than some would have liked, and the bill moved forward. But in the end. We have already begun to move on to the next phase, which is educating the public further about what the impacts are.
And as we said at the very beginning of the program, there's currently a lawsuit, so we'll have to see how that pans out. We are unfortunately out of time, but my thanks very much to the three of you for coming down. It's a complex issue, but I think the three of you have done a nice job of giving us a rounded view of how the discussion is going forward. So thanks very much for being a part of our show. Thanks also to you who watched and listened. You can send us your questions for next month's program to infocus@indiana.edu, and you can leave a comment, or you can see portions of this show by visiting our website, indianapublicmedia.org/infocus. Have a nice night.
Production support for In Focus is provided by Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for Central and Southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com, and by viewers like you. Thank you.